Sure. Rick Jackson. Sorry I can't be here with you today, but I'm calling in from my son's house in Portland.
Well, we're really glad to have you. Is there anybody else on Zoom that's part of the meeting? Cody, you want to introduce yourself?
I do, yes. Sorry, my video is still not working. I'm gonna just try for the next couple minutes. But yeah, I'm Cody. I'm currently in Eugene. And yeah, I've tried to read through as much stuff and prep as much as possible. But yeah, I'm just excited to join you all.
Well, welcome, Cody. We're really happy to have you on board. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So,
Catherine Stock. I think I've met Cody at least in one meeting so far, but hello, Cody.
Brad, before you go, the big picture is really small.
You wanna pick it and pin it,
It just
or
went
just pick it?
mini.
Okay, there we go.
So that's everybody that's online.
Perfect.
And Martina had a chance to view it.
Would you have named IT guys?
That's what we have on the committee. Layla.
Yeah.
Layla, city manager.
Patrick Johnston.
Brian Sent,
John Collier.
Connie Burton,
Mark Adamson.
And Linda Kozlowski. So we're going to pass the baton to Layla Aman to kind of bring us up to date and get us focused.
Great, thanks. Well, thanks for letting me kind of take your meeting on. I know you're meeting the project, the stakeholder list. I wanted to make sure everybody got the email from Violet on Friday with the updated community engagement plan and the updated stakeholder list. Did you all get that? Okay, good, because I think that's what we should start with. But before we started there, I wanted to try to cover a couple of things. Since we last had a formal meeting, I know you guys have had 2 additional meetings. And part of what I meant by checking in is just touching base with all of you to sort of see where kind of you're at, and also give you some perspective and hopefully some additional support and direction on what's expected of the committee. So I appreciate both Catherine and Linda kind of meeting with you, and I think there's a general understanding now of why it's important that this body meet in an official capacity. So I do want to start by saying, like, it's totally cool to sit and talk to your folks in small groups and to reach out to each other for help and to utilize each other as you're going through particularly this first stage, which is the community conversations with folks. So that's, I think, great, and I hope you'll do that. But meeting as a body needs to occur within a formal context. You have a pretty specific role, and so I'm really excited to see that there's so much energy around this, because there's a lot of work to do. But I want to make sure too that the committee understands that you're not expected to do more than what we're asking you to do. This first phase, so I thought we could just take a moment and kind of review the roles and responsibilities again as a team, and just like hash through that a little bit. I know some folks maybe walked away from that meeting not feeling that they had clear direction on what the next steps were. So I'm hoping today we can clarify that too before we get on to the task of identifying stakeholders. Does that sound okay with everyone online too? Does that sound okay? And can you hear me okay, Rick?
Rick, can you hear? Okay, good.
So the first thing is, and this is in your charter, this was in the application that you applied for, there's sort of 6 key things that you're sort of responsible for. And I'll start with guiding public outreach and community engagement, right? So that's providing comment and feedback on the proposed plan. And so many of you have done that already. We've changed that. I hope some of you saw some of those changes that you gave us reflected both in the website and in the community engagement plan. And then to do some of this outreach. And so one of the things I'm really excited about is the amount of energy that's here, because we as being us, we're a collective whole. Like there's me, there's the project team, and there's the advisory committee, there's decision-making bodies, but I see us all collectively as the city. But we are all together, the advisory committee, the consultant team, working together to get information out before the various decision makers, right? Which are planning commission and the city council ultimately. And so a big role that, and I've had experience, I don't know if many of you know my background. If you are, you want to fall asleep during the session, that's fine. But I hold a master's in regional planning. I've spent 4 years in the private sector doing comprehensive planning, strictly comprehensive planning. And then I worked for Metro, the regional government, implementing Metro's 2040 growth concept, which was a regional plan that incorporated 25 cities, 3 counties. So I worked with local jurisdictions like the city of Hillsborough, the city of Beaverton, the city of Gresham, to implement their comp plans. So I kind of have, this big regional look down to the ground. I've also helped out on no less than 10 comp plans. I helped with, and helped me as part of a team, the city of Dallas Forward Comprehensive Plan, on down to like a smaller scale, which the most recent one I worked on was as a community development director for the city of Milwaukee, which I encourage you to look at. Actually, that's one of we won an award. I will not take full or much credit for that plan, because I had a planning director who was amazing and a whole team that ran that process, but it was a very inclusive process. And we had great public engagement and outreach throughout that. So if you're looking for some inspiration, I encourage you to check that out. So I have a lot of experience working with community groups and advisory committees. And it's always a little bit, it's like turning the engine for the first time. Just people kind of understanding where they fit, what their role is. That takes a little bit of effort. And so the key role that you play is really as a liaison to the rest of the community. And we've asked you to do a pretty specific task, and I spoke with the consultant team today, and we have a plan for some tools to help you do that better, because one of the feedback items I got was a need for that. So I think we have some kind of getting us to the next stage tools. So what we're hoping we'll do in the stage is once we kind of, I'm going to say it in air quotes, finalize the stakeholder list, because the stakeholder list can continue to grow as we go through this process and say, oh, we didn't think about these people, we should reach out to them. Is to have as many of you that can, and some of us are not going to be able to do that, but those of you that can, do that direct outreach using the community conversation toolkit that you were provided. And so I want to stress that only do as much as you can. If you're not able to have any conversations with folks, that's okay. You're still playing a really important role as an advisory committee member and coming to the now 7 meetings that we have left, which are going to be pretty specific meetings. But right now, the real focus, and I'm hoping to sort of channel all this positive energy into, is for those of you that are able to do those community conversations with folks and start to gather input. I've gotten a lot of questions, both directly and indirectly, about the level of specificity that you need to be asking these questions. And I trust that you've all reviewed that toolkit, and you'll see that those questions that are prompts for you are very broad reaching. That's by design, because the majority of people that you will interact with in the community don't have subject matter expertise in any of the 16 goals that we're responsible for developing policies for. The majority will not. And so the other thing to note too is you're not expected to have subject matter expertise in any of these topics, whether it's housing, whether it's transportation, whether it's natural resource protection or dune and beach management, right? You're not. One of the things about Oregon's land use planning system and kind of the fundamentals of community engagement is that we meet people on their level. And you're gonna encounter, like, a lot of you are super smart, you get housing issues, you understand all of that. But what we're asking for at this point and what will inform the rest of the plan is really getting at what people care about, right? And you'll find that when you just use those general prompts that are in that community conversation kit, people are just gonna start talking to you. I've had conversations with many of you. I don't need to say much more than like, what do you want? Well, and it just comes out. And you're gonna find that. So like, the biggest lift you're gonna have to do is recording that information. And I brought, just because I always like to have the props. Did I grab it when I ran out? I had a file this thick of data, survey responses, and summaries from those town halls I held, right?
The 2022.
Yeah, like 300 pages.
Yes.
And I had it, I was all like tabbed, I was so excited to bring it, but I was late, so I left it on the desk. And I distilled that down into about 4 pages. And if you went through all of that, you would see that there's thematically the same things come up. And I didn't ask people, so tell me, what do you think about the implementation of House Bill 2001 middle housing? They'd just be like, what? You know, when you ask people about, you know, what are the things you care about? What are the things you're concerned about? What do you want to see have happen in your community? That stuff's going to organically come out. And really, the advantage of having people from the community going to the community and asking those questions is you can really get at what's in people's heart. And I know it sounds cliche, but that's actually what we're trying to get at, is what do you care about? What are the things that matter to you most? And those things will come up. And so what we're asking is, to the greatest extent that you can, look at that list, see who you have connections with, go out and talk to them. We will not hit everybody on that list this round. We may not hit everybody on that list throughout the project. But what we have is a way to reach people, to inform people, to say when we get to a specific chapter, for example, if we know we haven't contacted some of these groups, or we didn't have a chance to, we might say, hey, we have some policy language, would you be willing to fill out the survey that's online? So we can start to directly reach out to some of these people. So the expectation is not that you're gonna get that whole list, that you're all responsible for that. But what we're saying is, to the greatest extent that you can, talk to those folks, because what you'll bring back to us will be a rich data set that isn't just gonna go into the visioning portion of this process. We're gonna pull from it, just like I did. When I asked people about natural resource protection, I got housing in there, right? When I asked them about public safety, I got housing in there. So we will be very conscious of that, and we will be taking that information, treating it like data, and kind of aligning it with the different goals. Because we have a 2-year, maybe more, and I think people need to prepare themselves for that. We have a limited capacity, we have to get the housing work done, and it's gonna take as much time as it needs in order to be done right. So I just want us all prepared. Like I told you 2 years ago, I said it might be longer. It very well could be. We're gonna try very hard to stay on that schedule, but you will be informed if that thing slows down, and if it slows down, it's for a good reason. So I just wanted to emphasize that, like, these generalized questions, they're not just fluff. Like, this is the stuff that will get us to really defining. When we talk about a vision, it's really kind of a collective view of like, where is this thing going? Because then we can start to really use that as a framework for designing policies that can help us get there. So that's what we're asking you to do right now. And the toolkit, as I read through it, and I read through it trying to take it off with my planner's brain not there, So these are pretty good starts, but you can feel free to ad hoc it when you're in a conversation. If you find that the folks that you're there are like, I really care about childcare, right? That may come up, then you're like, okay, tell me more about that. So there's a reason why it's not specific. I got a question about, are we gonna do later interviews about specific goals? Possibly. You know, if the committee has the aptitude to do that, or the appetite, you have the aptitude, the appetite to do that, then that maybe is something we do later on down the line. But this first real push is to both get kind of just that tap in folks, get that broad section of folks that we can, and get that feedback. And then we sort of launch into a more detailed thing, because it's not just the community conversations we're doing, right? We're doing workshops, we're doing open houses, and we're doing surveys. And so we'll be getting feedback throughout the process, and we'll be looking to you to make sure that the deliverables that are created, which will ultimately form the basis of the plan, or ultimately form the updated ordinance, reflect that feedback. So I'll stop there and just ask if you guys have any, like, did that help? Do you have any questions? Do you wanna dive into that a little bit more?
Sure, I got one, and that is, this is very helpful. For me, I'm often running into people like working, they're at work, but they have like some moments of downtime. Should I be prepared and just have the toolkit or a copy of the toolkit with me when I'm out and about and I know I'm going to have an opportunity to talk one-on-one with people? Essentially, are one-on-one conversations worthwhile to capture as opposed to waiting for the,
Yes,
okay,
absolutely. Like, I think be opportunistic, like, get out there. And if you decide, if you find somebody you're like, oh, I should talk to you, they're not gonna let talk to them, add to the list later. You know,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying, it's a living document. You're not gonna be just like, you can only talk to these people. You might find you're out there, you're at an event, and you meet somebody new, and you're like, hey, I'm gonna pull out my toolkit, talk to you. So like, again, you can and you're able to, that's a wonderful way to get feedback. And there's no like too little amount, right? Even if it's like a 20-minute, 10-minute conversation, you get some good nuggets, like throw it in there. And we just wanna know who it is because it provides context. But, you know, when we do these big community meetings, we're not like Linda Kozlowski wrote this comment. You know, we're just saying members of the community wrote this comment, right? Like, so yes, that's a great question, and hopefully that helps.
Yep, yeah.
Thoughts, feelings, suggestions? Does that
I'm
help?
concerned about the data from 2022, which I have looked at several times out of curiosity, because I have a lot of free time, so I read all those comments again.
Yeah,
How are we gonna literally apply that data
yeah,
along with the data that we're collecting individually or in the groups that we might speak with?
Yeah.
Actually applying that data to what 3J is gonna do.
so that's a great question. So they've had possession of that information for quite some time. And as I mentioned earlier, we're at the beginning, right? We have a couple of year process. So by the time we get to like phase 4, you're gonna have forgotten all about goal 10, you're gonna be on to goal 18. So that data, like I said, we're sort of binning it, right? We're keeping it with all the other goals. So when we get to the phase that we start drafting policy, that's gonna be front and center. And that's also gonna be looked at with the data that we've been collecting through this process. So I'm gonna be really honest with you, it's both art and science, right? So there's an art form to this. And because you're really trying to take, again, what people are telling you from their heart, right? Which is, that's what that was. But then I translate it like, I don't want growth and blah, 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 to something, I didn't mean to use that voice, but you know. Into something that is like an objective policy statement, right? That's what we're trying to do, is create objective policy statements that reflect the overall community, but that are also in compliance with state law, in compliance with all kinds of things. So I'll give you an example, which was, we got a number of comments saying we need to stop this kind of growth in this zone. And it's like, okay, well, we can't actually do that because that triggers a whole property rights taking issue, et cetera. We can't stop development. But what we heard from that was people want more certainty about where certain types of development go, right? So that can be moved into a policy statement that says, we want commercial nodes on main streets and corridors, for example. And I'm not saying that's specific to Milwaukee. So that's where kind of like the expertise kind of comes into play, is we can take what people feel and look at what past policies were too, because we're not dropping everything from the old comp plan either. We're gonna look at that and see what's still relevant here. And there's quite a bit of relevance in there. What do people tell us now? What's changed? And then how do we refine this in language that represents where we are today and where we want to go 20 years from now based on that overarching vision? So we have that data. It is being held tight and it is being considered. And once we develop that policy language, we're going to look at that. We're going to look at all the data that we collected here. We're going to look at the data we collected through surveys for each particular subject matter. And then that's how we start to craft the policy.
When you're talking about the concern about the zoning, and I assume it's the commercial zone size.
It was just an example.
Yeah. Shouldn't we be prepared / trained to have appropriate conversations with the people who would be for or against some kind of development right next door to them? If zoning changes, if zoning becomes less tight, more tight,
Tell me
or are
more
we
about
not? So, I have a pet project, it's here and here.
Yeah.
I wanna do a pocket park. It has nothing to do with you and your budget.
Yeah.
It has to do with me and my budget.
Right.
But in order to do it, it would have to be permitted.
Yeah.
And to become a park and to be given to the city or the county or somebody else, the land trust, who's got ideas. Someone would have to accept the liability for the existence of it.
Right.
And that's very applied data.
Yeah.
And that's how I think.
Okay.
I can't just go say, do you love Manzanita? What do you love about it? I can't just be an icebreaker. It's not how my brain works.
I totally respect that. But we have to, that's where we need to be. So and I love that, because like, what I would like, I want you to zoom back out,
Yeah,
right? Your role, frankly, is you need to see the forest, not
not the trees.
you're talking about insects.
I'm talking about
at this
imagery.
point, right?
Yeah.
And I'm with you, because I spent the majority of my career actually implementing comp plans, not being the policy. I've done both. And so I think that gives me a really good advantage, because I can see through the trees and down into the ground, and so I get you, right? That's implementation, right? And that comes with a whole lot of steps.
And that is,
That's
not
well
what we're
beyond
doing.
where we need to go. However, if someone says to you, Connie, I have an idea for a pocket park and I want it to go here, you listen to that and you there's a desire for more green space in this town. This person wants a pocket park. That then works itself into goal 5, open space. The city, we want to see more blah, 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 open space in the city, or more pocket parks, or better utilization of land. So we take that and translate that into a policy. Then it's up to the governing body to decide what's a priority.
Yeah.
And then where do they focus my time to then go in and implement that? So we've had a number of folks, for example, ask us about, what do you do with Underhill? We're like, don't know. We want to go through the comp plan process first, understand what the community wants. And then council has to weigh that against all the other things that are going on, because we've also got trails, we also got implementation of the TSP, we have all this stuff. that's the governing body's choice, and then they delegate that, or they give staff direction to implement it. And then there's another community process to implement it, like, okay, we're gonna plan a park. Like, I'm not gonna do that in a vacuum if I'm your city manager, I'm gonna initiate a public process.
So don't even ask them what they wanna do with Underhill, cause that's the trees. Just say,
Correct,
what
just
do
say,
you
what
want?
are your thoughts
what are
about
your-
open space, you know? And you just kind of, if you find yourself getting into the weeds,
Okay,
pull yourself back up. But if the folks you're talking to are getting into the weeds, that's cool, just write
just
it
write
down.
more detail down.
Yeah, and that gives us a very good indication of like, oh, okay, because if we see 20 comments or we get, we know, we're like, okay, that's a thing, right? So that's a great question, and it is like, it's a great way to like learn to use your mind differently, is that you need to see the connection between Connie's Pocket Park with, we have to get that policy in place. And so we need to understand from the community, because the council's not gonna delegate, they're not gonna ask staff to do that unless it's a priority of the community, right? So if you're the only one, which you won't.
Right. No, I
want your
will have
pocket park, but you get my point,
I
right?
get your point,
Like,
absolutely,
the more people
absolutely
we
get your
talk
point.
to, the more people are gonna say, like, I care about parks, like, I don't care about streets, I care about this.
Mhm.
And that's the kind of information that when you do a good comp plan, again, it's just based in the hearts and minds of the people who live here, the best planners for their own city. It's just, there's this particular skill set that you need in order to implement that, and that's what the consultant team and I'm here to help you do.
That helps me understand why the questions are so generalized.
Yeah,
Because it's not the way my brain works.
right.
So
I
I'll
hear
do
you.
it your way.
It's the way of the
Yeah.
process.
I think it raises another good point, even though Linda and I won't be doing these groups because we're in policy later, but the whole idea that, which is tricky sometimes, especially if you do have some knowledge about maybe housing, to actually, because any facilitator's job is not to correct somebody's understanding or say, gosh, I'm not sure you really know enough to have that opinion, which I'm not saying anybody really does that.
Don't say that.
You know, when you do know, you're really just listening, because that helps us gauge where people are coming from and what they do understand, what they do know, but not to be, you don't have to have the burden, I guess, of being the correct person in the room if they're off track, even of what might be legally possible
Right,
to desire.
No, even I've sat there and listened to people, I'm like, oh, there's no way we can do that, but I just am like, okay. Because we're really just trying to get at, what's the bigger picture here that we're trying to get at, right?
What's behind that?
Right, and then we figure out incrementally how to make that happen on the ground in a way that's legal, defensible, and appropriate. So that means because you'll hear some folks tell you some wild stuff, and some of the best ideas come out of wild stuff, right?
Mhm.
Some of them don't. And so that's where when people are like, I said I wanted this in the plan, you're like, we got your comment, but it wasn't included for these reasons. And that will invariably happen through this process. I was saying good government, everybody walks away just kind of somewhat satisfied. I was slightly. Not everybody gets what they want. at the end
Rick
of
thinks
the
that's
day.
Rick enjoyed it.
It's kind of true. Because if someone's
Sure.
really happy, someone's gonna be really upset on the other end of it.
So Rick, do you have a question?
I do, yeah. So it goes all the way back to Layla's initial question of asking for our feedback on what she shared. And so two things. One, extremely helpful. So thank you for that, Layla. I really love the Underhill Plaza example that was just given. That really frames a lot of your comments in a very helpful way. So thank you for that. My question is, I believe when you started speaking, you said we have 6 responsibilities on the PASC, and I was taking notes. I ended up with 5, and so I either missed one or I don't have them. Could you quickly reiterate what those 6 responsibilities are?
Yeah, and why don't I pull them straight from your charter?
Oh, okay, it's from the charter, then that's fine. I'll just go back to that.
So, but let's just, for the good of the order, and we can see you now, Cody. Had everything organized, and just it all falls apart. that's not it, that's goals. Conduct. So your responsibilities. Okay. So give public outreach and community engagement, providing comment and feedback. This is just summarized in the first paragraph with responsibilities, but I have more detailed list. Reviewing and commenting on key work products. So one of the other questions I got, and one of the things that the consultant team and I are gonna work on and get out to you is, what are the next 7 meetings about? Now, it might take a little, so I'll read the full list so we can answer your question and then I'll come back to that. Act as liaisons to specific constituencies or interest groups. Assist in hosting public events or conducting small-scale outreach. You're ambassadors to the project and actively engaging community members to participate. So whether you're harassing them with questions or you're saying, hey, come to this meeting, we also expect you to come to the meetings and you to do the surveys as citizens to participate, because that's where your voice will get heard. And act as champions for the project when the recommendations come out. You know, you heard the concept, you disagree and commit. Like when we get to a point where we decide, and if it's adopted by the council, even if you disagree, you commit to the outcome because we've gone through this exhaustive process. Does that help, Rick?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
And just to further my point about, if you look at the project schedule, which, you know, these are helpful for some, confusing for others, I respect that. But we have a meeting associated with each major task of the project. And so those are gonna be kind of beefy. And I'm actually gonna work to, when you start getting, so like the community visioning, we'll take the feedback we get from you all, from your outreach to the point that we can. So my hope is we'll get out there sooner than later. We'll take the town hall comments that we got from a couple of years ago and we'll craft a vision statement. And we'll bring that to you to say, do you think this reflects what you've heard and seen? And get your feedback, and then we refine that before we take it to the next step.
A vision statement for each piece,
For the plan overall.
for the plan.
So we see, that's why your questions in your community conversations packet start really general. Because you're like, what kind of place do you want this to be? And that's a great starting point for people to understand. It's like a mission statement that kind of guides and informs all the other. We have 16 goals, we're only updating 15 because goal 12 has already been updated, which is transportation, with the transportation
I
systems
thought we
plan.
were only 14 of them.
We've got 15.
There's 17.
There's 19,
And we're not
16,
doing
15, 14, you're right, sorry, there's 19, we're not doing 3, one's already done. So 19
So
minus 4 is
it is
50, yeah,
okay.
sorry.
I thought there were 7.
I've been doing math all morning, so my head hurts.
Yeah.
So one of the things the consultant team is gonna do for us is put together kind of just a outline that will eventually form the agenda for each of these meetings. So you can understand broadly, it's subject to change, but kind of what's gonna happen at those meetings, so you can prepare for that. There's a lot of homework in some of these tasks. So for example, the comprehensive plan review and residential zoning ordinance audit. Like, the zoning ordinance audit's a big document, right? There's a lot of technical information in that. You're not gonna be asked, is this compliant with Oregon state law? You're gonna be asked, does this make sense? Can you understand this? Is there a better way that we can present this information so that the community, the decision makers can understand this better? So that's kind of the expectation of your role, is not to be subject matter experts, but regular people who are reading this stuff and who care about it and want to understand it and understand how it informs the decisions that your elected officials and appointed officials will be making once they get this information. And does it jive with what you've seen, heard, and felt from the engagement that you've participated in? So we're going to do that too. That'll be coming in short order.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So as we are gathering all this information, these various things, you mentioned open houses and surveys and workshops. We have the 2022 survey, and then you all have the copies with counselors. Do we have like a repository of information that we'll be collecting? Like And does it break into like these 15 categories? And I'm just taking a step back, I'm just trying to think in like whatever, 1, 2, 3 months, as I find stuff, would it make sense for me to put it into this bucket versus put it into an entire, like, just setting it up in a Google Doc? Like, does it have to have any kind of organization that way, or am I thinking too far in advance?
No, I think actually, so that's another thing I talked to the team about today, which was, so broadly speaking, the consultancy will be managing all of this data back of house. We, as far as the comp plan goes, we will be collecting information from kind of our official engagement, which is outlined in pretty good detail in your community engagement plan. So we'll keep all of that. And one of the things that you'll see throughout the process, we did this in Milwaukee too, is we just remind people, we talked to X many people, we've done this. So we'll constantly be reporting back out. As far as the community conversations go, because you all are going to be the ones going out there, the consultant team's going to develop a Google Doc. We're going to put everything in that list. We're going to send that out to you, and that will be a tool that you all, as the committee members, will just have open access to. And hopefully sign up for some stuff and then tell us and report back on what you did. And then we're going to have you send your feedback that you get to Cody. He knows this now, maybe.
He's ready.
I told him, he's like, what am I gonna do? I'm like, we'll just assign stuff as we have meetings. You'll send that to Cody, Cody will compile it, and then as we get kind of critical mass of stuff, we'll send that out to everyone on the committee. So you're able to read that stuff too, because you're gonna be out there in the field. I figured you would all be interested in having that information. But the team's gonna be collecting that and doing their own sort of distillation of that information. The raw data will always be available to you. If you want the 350 pages, we can give it to you, or you can find it. But you're not expected to distill that, but to the extent that you're interested, we'll share as much of that as we can. So, for example, in community workshops, we usually create a formal summary of the outcome of that, but then there's the surveys. If we take written comment, there will be a PDF with 300 pages of data. Like, that's all public information, so anybody who wants it can have it. We're not gonna bombard you with it or expect you to have it, but if you want it, you can ask for it. And then we will actively and proactively share the information you'll be collecting over the next 4 to 5 weeks with members of whoever can get talked to during this time.
And that's why we need to ask the questions in the toolkit and write down
Yeah,
the comments, so it's
yeah. So we have a record,
digestible.
and we have a record of it, because we won't, the consultant team won't be in that meeting with you on purpose, right? It's by design, but we need you to reflect back to us what you heard. You can even have people, if you have multiple people in a meeting, you can have them write their own feelings or comments down and just collect that and just scan it or drop it off at City Hall. Like, it doesn't have to be super technical, because then we can just take that and have Cody type it up and in a Word document, and so we have a record of it. That's super important, because at the end of the day, like, I remember stuff, but then I always say that my mind's like a filing cabinet, and the files end up having to get put away so something else can get put in. I can go back to that, but sometimes it takes me time, so it's better to write things down. Yeah, that's why it's super important to have stuff down.
And then as a follow-up, for the folks who were in like a meeting with, coffee with counselors, and if somebody says, hey, I did the 2022 survey, now I can say, well, that's actually been given to this group already, and they have access to that, and they've already thought that through. If they ask about the meetings with counselors, coffee with counselors, has all the data from that come to them too, if they ask me that question?
No,
Or do I
because
not answer
just
that?
specific, no, you can answer it, you just say this is a different kind of outreach than coffee with counselors, and policymakers, decision makers are in those meetings. It's a different format for a different purpose.
Right.
So no, we won't I mean, as Linda and I are filling out a survey, I suppose we could reflect something of, you know, what we feel based on listening to hundreds of people over the years, but that's more for you than for me over the years. But,
Thank you.
no. And so, yeah, that's great to clarify that, yeah.
But St. Patrick and I are at the coffee on Thursday,
Mhm.
and one of you is, and things are talked about. We scribble notes and compare notes and submit notes that are directed by, I mean, is that,
Where do you draw the line, is
Yeah.
what you're asking.
Yeah, I think, so in my mind, you and Patrick, you're on this committee. As I mentioned, one of the biggest roles you'll play is evaluating policies that are based on community input. That's data for your brain. Is it specific data that should be documented through a specific process? No. But that's information that you can carry with you, because I guarantee someone else is gonna say exactly what you heard in that meeting in some other format, in some other fashion. And if they didn't, it's either not an issue that rises to the top, or it's something we didn't ask enough about. And you'll, in your role as you're evaluating policies, be able to say, I heard this from a bunch of people, whether it was formal or informal. I don't see it reflected here. Then we would build on that. Now, it isn't to say that council can't choose to have a conversations with counselors that's just about the comp plan, and that maybe we would have some members of the committee there, but we haven't
I was
decided
gonna
that.
ask you about that.
But if we did that in that case, like, I would be
tangible,
there.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it
a way
could
to
be
be
a great
tangible.
way to do some additional outreach outside of our consultant scope of work. But we can cross that bridge when we get there. So I think there is kind of official and unofficial, but as a member of this community, when you're hearing and talking about stuff outside of an official capacity, your role on this committee will be to ensure that, to the best extent you can, that you're representing, I mean, that's your job. You're representatives of the larger community, but you're not the deciders, frankly, of what the community wants. But if you hear stuff and you don't see it reflected, or you don't understand why it's not in there, then that's a great flag to wave.
So just to kind of maybe make it easier for Cody, do we put this information in the body of an email, or should it always be an attachment?
So I think whatever works best for you. I think the easiest thing, so you have like your community conversations toolkit, and we did it pretty analog on purpose. Because we want great accessibility, right? So there's like, your discussion notes could be handwritten. Just try to write legibly, would be your only ask. And then we scan those and send those over, and either Cody or the consultant team will put those, if needed, into a format. We might read that and then, okay, check, like, I don't know what the organizational structure would be, but like, oh, how's this came up. So if you
So
can,
it could be that.
it could just be a piece of paper that you hand out, you know, because what we want to do and what's super important to do in a process like this, and I've been in this town long enough to know, a lot of people like to write stuff down. They like to have a piece of paper in their hand. And so, you know, from a technical standpoint, I prefer it's typed up. But if it can't be typed up, or if you have bandwidth and time to then take the notes and type them up, brilliant.
What you mean is you want it electronically.
But it should be as much as we can
Submitted
electronically,
electronically,
but if not, if you're analog, you drop them off at City Hall, I'll scan it. Like, and then we'll send it over, and then we figure out an easy way, but we don't want that to be a barrier for folks.
I mean, it wouldn't be a barrier for me, I
I know it wouldn't be a barrier for you.
I just thought, I was just trying to make it, like, I didn't know how it would get filed, so I was trying to make it as
Yeah.
streamlined as possible. But-
Yeah, I mean, ideally it's typed up, right, because then we can start to, you know, when I did the stuff from the survey, you know, I was able to copy paste stuff, but again, it doesn't, we just want the information, we'll figure out an efficient way to.
Is there any way we can get that thing you just showed us, the questions,
Again,
in a Word document?
Oh, yeah,
Sure.
currently in a
In other
PDF.
words, yeah, so,
Or,
Yeah.
so we can sit there and type while we're
No,
listening.
that's a
Well,
great,
that's a
or
good
type
point,
it
yeah.
afterwards, is what I was thinking.
I was thinking, oh,
Pardon?
like,
I was just thinking afterwards, you could, I could type it
Oh,
immediately. and
nice, yeah, I was thinking just do it while you're listening, yeah.
I can't type and listen though.
No, I can't do much.
that's easy peasy. Yeah.
Well,
And then I guess the other thing there is the analytical side of me wants to understand, okay, we're obviously gonna have some public meetings too, right?
Yes, well,
And then we'll be doing these conversations and I imagine all the other things you talked about. I guess I'm just trying to figure out if I was a consultant, how it would all fit together. Like, I don't know why I need to know that. Like, I need to know how it fits together somehow. Like what,
all the outreach, you mean?
yeah, like when you're having the public meetings, they'll probably be there, right? And that
Yes,
information gathered, they'll be gathering.
yes,
And then we'll be doing these other conversations and they'll be and pushing them to them.
yes.
And then it's not our problem how they deal with it on the back end. I guess I'm
Yes.
really wondering, I realize most of this stuff is like qualitative. But is there some way that makes it quantitative where they're actually paying attention to like, oh, 100 people said that? Or versus just one thing or 100 things get weighed equally?
Yeah, it's a great point. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? Because we have, I do love that, I just like hedged around your question, but because there may be some things we have to deal with that nobody cares about, right? It doesn't always often happen, but, you know, for example, we have to deal with wastewater infrastructure as part of it. I'm guessing that's not top of the list for most people in the community.
Right.
But when we go talk to Naomi Wastewater, as a technical advisor, like, that's gonna be there. So to your question, yeah, I mean, one of the things like I had my own method for summarizing the survey data, is I kind of went through and identified basically themes of stuff and was like, oh, that showed up like, but I didn't have a matrix, right? You don't want to get overly scientific about it. But yes, you do start to see, and I'm sure you saw this, Connie, when you're going through the information, you're like, okay, there's some real obvious things that start to pop up here. I don't exactly know how the consultant team is going to do that, but there will be some of that, right? So we're not going to take one comment that someone's said and have that be like, that's the foundation of this. But if it's the only comment we get about that one thing, it might help inform that. So yes, there's definitely, because you will see tons and tons of repetition of things just said differently in slightly different ways, and it becomes evident.
Do you, as we're talking to people out in the community, and we present what we heard back to you, how much filtering do you want us to do?
Give it to us as raw as you
As
can.
raw as you can get it, okay?
Yeah.
Because I've
Yeah,
done a lot of that sort of thing over the years, and
yeah,
there's a lot of listening to what people say and trying to figure out what they mean, because usually they give you, you know, with a building, for instance, they,
oh, yeah.
you know, they
I
say,
don't know anything
oh my
about that.
God, I have to have a big window on the north side.
Right.
Well, yeah.
What's big?
What's big and why do you need it on the north side?
How much can you afford?
Well, there's a bazillion different,
Right.
but there's always, it's like, oh crap, it's like, I had glare in my last office, you know, it's
Right.
from the south facing window, so they want a big window on the north side.
Right.
And a lot of people will give you that kind of answer.
Well, and that's part of the art, right? Is that when you're
Right.
in these meetings and someone says, I want a big window on the north side, you're like, tell me more about what you mean.
Yeah,
Until you get to a place and you say, okay, what I heard you say was,
Yeah.
right? My therapist.
Until they tell
this is
you-
My husband, like, this is what I hear. And they can say, yeah, that reflects what I'm saying, and then that's what you write down.
Yeah.
Or you say, why don't you write down what you mean? But you're right, part of this isn't you're just gonna be like transcribing everything someone says, because if you're in a group setting too,
you're gonna see this, a lot of people are saying this, so you might wanna reflect that comment that several people in the meeting said X, Y, and Z. Or, you know,
At three
felt this was important. So I think that's part of what you'll do in that. That's a great question. Did I get it all your?
Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
yeah, and there'll be quantitative stuff later, I promise, in GIS.
Are we asking in the toolkit different questions than were asked in the Envision Manzanita 2022?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no.
I mean, shouldn't we be asking almost the same in order to
It
see
kind of
if
is.
there's been a,
Yeah, and again, I asked really broad questions, so if you came to those town halls, I just had subject matter lines, and so just tell us what you care about.
It seems very similar.
Yeah, and then, you know, I had some staff there, you know, talking to folks and, helping elicit conversation. And then we had folks, you know, that check mark stuff, they're like, yep, I feel that. So yeah, that's why the questions are broad, is because we're not trying to be like, what do you think specifically about June grading? You know, it's gonna come up. So yeah, I think that does create sort of a balance and a comparativeness between what we talked about a couple years ago and what we're talking about now.
do you think you need to give us, like some specific things like how we should explain middle housing when we're having a casual conversation?
You know, no, I don't. I'm always happy to talk with you and help you with your understanding of things. But again, Connie, it's just that zooming back up, right? What is it about middle housing you care about? Why do you want middle housing? What do you mean by middle housing?
Yeah.
You know, I'm not gonna tell you what I think about middle housing, right? I wanna hear from you what you think that is. Who do you think that serves? Who do you think should be served? So it's again, just trying, when you find yourself going back down to the ferns, pull yourself back up and say, what am I trying to get out here? What is this person trying to say to me? You know, I want housing for my kids so they can come back after college. What does that mean? That might, do you think we should, like, what do you mean by that? So you're not planting the seed. And so the more we poison you with that,
So don't
the more
explain.
likely.
Just
No.
ask questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when they say, well, why didn't you explain it to me? Say, because I don't know. I'm trying to understand, I'm going through the same thing, but I know something's missing. You know, and do your best to just try to get that, again, organic, sort of heartfelt feeling. Because people actually instinctively know all the things that we need to do in this plan. We just have to put it in wonky language that then helps translate it into ordinance language, which is wonkier, then we can build stuff at the end of the day. Anybody online have any questions? Brad's here, this is one.
Rick, do you have any additional? No, Rick doesn't. Cody, do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
I do not know. Yeah, I just appreciate you letting me be a part of this.
All right, thank you. We're glad to have you.
You're welcome, get
Yeah,
ready.
Yeah, stand back.
It's like, oh my God.
So, Layla, would you talk a little bit, and you have, but would you talk a little bit about the role of the consultants with this, that how they connect, and what your expectations are for the consultants?
Yeah, sure. So the consultants are hired to really, so to lead and support this process, right? So they lead it in the sense that they're the subject matter experts, or hire the subject matter experts as sub-consultants to ensure that what we put together is in compliance with state law. Right, because the statewide land use planning rules are pretty clear. And then their role is to really take all this information that we're getting from our community outreach to lead that community outreach. So you asked Brian about kind of how this all fits together. The community engagement plan includes surveys, it includes the project website. There's going to be a report at the end of it that summarizes all of the outreach, and it might have an addenda. We did this in Milwaukee, it's like 500 pages of just raw data. So we may end up doing something like that. And so they will lead and develop all the content and materials for that. And that's not a small task. So like, I think our first outreach is the housing related stuff. So Marcy McAnally, who's an expert in Oregon housing in particular, she's doing a code audit. So she's looking at our ordinance right now and saying, is this compliant with Oregon State housing rules? Here's where it is, here's where it isn't, here's where it is, here's where it isn't, right? Just to kind of give you an example, you're gonna go out and talk to people about housing. They're gonna say, we want this, we want that, we don't want this, we don't want that. She's gonna be like, too bad, you have to have these things because they're required by state law. But here's some places where there's some gray area, and we want your help in choosing what fits your community the best. So she's gonna bring that expertise to that meeting. That's a lot of prep to come to a meeting like that, because you're trying to take an enormous amount of information and distill it into a series of choices. And to explain to the community in a nice way, you have a choice here, you kind of don't have a choice here. And here's the outcomes, here's why. Like, not, this is punitive, but we're actually getting at what everybody in the community has told us, which the town halls clearly told us, what many of us have heard, is we need a greater diversity of housing. And so here's how we're gonna get there. So that's what the consultant team's role is, to really take a lot of this information, summarize it in a meaningful way that gets us again to those specific product deliverables that you will all review before they become, it'll be public because everything's public, but before it goes to the planning commission, and then the planning commission will be like, we want these things changed, or we think this looks good, or whatever. And then after it goes through planning commission, then it goes to the city council for adoption. So that's kind of the role you play. It's really pretty critical. It's on that IEP2 sort of spectrum, it's an inform. So you're not necessarily decision makers, but you are influencing the outcome. That then goes to the first level of decision makers who make recommendations to the decision-making body, who then implements the legislative change, which is adoption of new policy language. So the consultant team is instrumental in that. They do 90% of the heavy lifting, right? That's kind of similar to like the project I'm working on with City Hall. I'm not the architect. I'm not the builder, but I'm the owner. And I represent the city as the owner. They're my project team. So they're the ones they're the experts, they're the ones building it. They tell me when there's a problem, or I engage with them about that. It's the same thing here. So I manage this project, the consultant team reports to me, but they're doing all of the legwork. They're writing and drafting everything, but before you see it, I redline it, I go through it, and I make sure it meets my standard before it goes to you, and you all rip it apart. And then we fix it, and then it goes to planning commission, they rip it apart, maybe a couple of times, and then it goes to the city council. So that's why by the time it gets to city council, a plan they're adopting, we can really confidently say this is founded in public input. That's why your role is so important in terms of your outreach, in terms of getting people to show up. It's not just doing these interviews. It's getting people to show up, to pay attention, to participate in every step of the process.
So, I have a
That's the
question.
whole point, right? Like, we should be implementing things that the community has asked us to do.
And that, for this period of time, is really critical. That outreach and bringing it back and being, the community being heard. I mean, it's always important, but at this day and time, it is really critical.
I don't know how to ask it exactly. One of the things that we talked about as a small group was that we didn't want to blame the state for some things.
Yeah.
So,
Take
I think we all agreed on that. We talked about it a couple of different times actually. And the way that I think that would be helpful, it's almost a request for you to ask the consultants about it. When they talk to us about what the state requires, I would like to understand why. And I think it'll be obvious, but I think if they just include that in their language all the time, I think it would just help my brain go, oh. And it would make me a better representative of the issues that we're talking about.
Are you talking about all land
I'm
use
talking about housing.
goals? Oh, housing.
specifically. But
Yeah,
I guess it would be all of them, but I'm
Yeah.
just thinking about housing.
yeah,
Because I don't wanna ever in my life say the state made us do that. I wanna say we should do this because I don't believe they're making us do anything
I
that we
mean-
shouldn't be doing.
no, it is a great, and I appreciate that, sentiment. A lot of people in this community might disagree with that, right? But I hear you, and I think that, I think the answer to that is how we implement it locally, right? Will be, so every city and every community, including the economy, are doing this right now. Because we're required to, but we're required to because the county went to bat and asked the state to make us do it. Because we have such, and I think the quick and dirty and really the only relevant answer here, Brian, is that we need housing. We have an extreme shortage of housing and people cannot afford to live here. And so we're doing this out of a humanitarian drive. That's it. That's the answer. And so how we do it has to reflect certain requirements. But what we're trying to do is, I think the simple answer is diversify the housing stock, right? Which means providing greater choice to people and creating an environment that, you know, I've said this, I'll say it, you'll hear me say it a million times again. My mentor told me is make what you want to have happen the easiest thing to do. And the thing the state did for us is not making us do it. They developed a model code to make it a lot easier for us to do it. Right now, our code does not make, I'm sorry, our ordinance, it will be a code someday if I have my say, does not make what we want to have happen the easiest thing to do. It's actually pretty darn hard to build a quad. You can't, right? Like we can't even build certain types of multifamily housing here. It supports the development of large lot expensive homes. And that is not the only thing we want here. So I think the answer is we're trying to provide greater housing choice and the state has given us a pathway to do that in an efficient way. And then we just have to adapt those model rules to something that reflects the values, the vision of our community. Because it's gonna be different here than it was in Milwaukee, right? Because we were building 5 to 7 story, but I'll tell you, we had some really serious discussions about that. And people were like, I'm all for housing, just not that here. And so part of that discussion is, okay, well, we have this framework we have to work within. How do we best deliver that? So I think that's how I would describe it, and we'll drill that home.
Okay.
I think Connie had a question.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Do you have a comment or?
Well, I had a comment, yeah, and it was just sort of to add what you were saying. We've already had to deal with this issue on the multi-housing thing. And yeah, we want this. We're not exactly sure how to get from where we are to where we want to be.
Yeah, I mean, that developer had to come in
Yeah,
and rezone the property, which is no easy thing.
Where, are you talking about lofts or?
no,
No, the,
no, I don't even know what they're calling it, yeah.
or is it Third Street you're talking about? Both of them. It's a
No,
problem.
I wasn't thinking about Third Street, I was thinking about the one,
Yeah.
that we rezoned over in the SOR.
Right.
Or, well, we annexed it, I don't think we have rezoned it yet.
It's rezoned and annexed at the same time.
Oh, they got both the same.
Yeah, and you're
But
right.
even then, what we had, we didn't really rezone it to what,
We don't have that zone.
we don't have a zone, we
I
don't really have a
spent
zone.
hours on the phone with that property
Right.
owner and that developer going, okay, you wanna build that? I have a square peg and a round hole.
Yeah.
Like, how do I fit these two things?
And from the city standpoint, we want the square peg,
But I'm still.
but we're stuck with a round hole,
Yeah,
and we're
a round
not
hole.
sure.
So we found a path, but it's not an ideal path, and
No.
they're gonna have to come in and do variances.
They're
all
doing, it's
that.
still a bunch of,
And
We're now down here,
my lack of
yeah, this
understanding,
is completely in the weeds.
but it's a good illustration.
But it shows the big picture that,
but in order for my brain to understand the whole thing, or not even the whole thing, some parts of this, is I'm like, well, what land is available? Well, is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about redeveloping land? Are we talking about urban growth boundary meeting the needs? How far does what Manzanita decides extend?
Yeah.
If Neoconi community did some middle housing, would that satisfy what Manzanita's ordinance is saying?
Come with me.
Yeah.
Right, okay,
But
just-
see, this is how
No,
my
it's
brain
a
is.
great question,
Yeah.
and I hear you. But like, we have a regional housing need, which you can then say is a
Yes.
statewide
Yes.
housing need, which you could then argue is a national housing need. We're focusing on we're not actually talking about housing need. What we're talking about is how do we create a policy, we're not even in the, well, we are in the regulatory framework that allows for us to build housing anywhere.
And we were
In the
talking
urban
about
growth
regionalism at our
But that's
brainstorming meeting.
again, like, we need to zoom back out and we're saying, okay, we're looking at what can Manzanita do in terms of its part to serve the regional, statewide, national, international housing need, right? Your mind can just go.
So acknowledge the greater need,
There's a huge need. We have basically
and then the
0%
consultants will
vacancy,
deal
right?
with the specific
Yes,
ordinance.
yes. And Marcy's an expert at that. Like, she's very good at that. She's writing the book for the state right now. So, and then, what will be coming later, we just sat in on a 2-hour call yesterday about housing needs analysis. We don't need to cross that bridge. So that's way down into the weeds. But, what we're focusing on is that policy and the regulatory framework, but you're not even there. You're just saying, what do you care about? What do you want from this? And then the consultant team and I will bring you a proposal. This meets statewide planning goals, this meets the statewide law. And again, here are things that you can't flex on, here are the things that you can. And then that's where we get feedback, input, and refine it, and then get ourselves an ordinance that the council can adopt by July of 25.
Is 3J gonna give us, when we look at one of those flexible situations, where, here, are they gonna give us options?
Yes.
And they don't have to be in the weeds options, it's just, here's one way of looking at it, here, like the SDR.
Yeah.
They weren't
That's one
really
of
in
the
the,
things that Marcy's really good at,
Perfect.
why you
Yeah.
recall, we selected that team because she showed us some of those
oh
diagrams.
yeah, I love it.
And I'll give you an example in Milwaukee when we did it. So one of the things that you have to do as part of the housing work is you gotta reduce parking by right. Right now, we require 2 parking spaces per bedroom or something, I'm saying, I mean, like, we don't even get into that, you like it, because it's in the weeds, but the point is that there may be trade-offs, right? So if we're like in Milwaukee, we were trying to preserve trees and build more intensely, and we were built out. So we were dealing with a city that had no growth, right? But we had redevelopment, but it's not. So we took that to the community and said, what do you want? If we say, allow for you to have 2 parking spaces, but you have to chop that tree down in order to build this, would you let someone go up a little higher in order to preserve that tree?
Yeah.
And so they were like, oh, well, I'd rather see the tree saved and have someone's roof go up 10 feet as opposed to requiring them to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things that when she evaluates our ordinance, will come to us and say, okay, here's where there's conflicts, here's how to resolve those conflicts, and here's where we have some options to resolve those conflicts. There may be a lot, there may be few. I don't know, because I haven't seen.
But that has come up.
But that will come up, and so you'll love that part,
Yeah.
it'll be totally different. And normally, I'll just say that normally in a comp plan process, you don't deal with the ordinance, like that comes later. But because we are obligated by the state to have this implemented in 2025 by July, and I'm gonna lose that $78,000 unless we do it, which is kind of a thing. But, we have $78,000 from the state to do the housing work.
Middle housing, it's a middle housing rate.
Yeah, the ordinance first. But since we're updating the policy, I was like, all right, let's just update the
Get it
housing
done
policy
on that.
first, and then that will guide those trade-offs. So when Marcy's developing those options, she'll have those policies to help her identify those choices, as opposed to kind of doing it in the vacuum.
Is that why you think some of these other issues may slide?
Yes.
Because we have
Yes.
so much focus on that.
Yes,
That's exactly why.
Community
And because
workshops.
of.
And the only thing we need to get done by next July is the housing.
Right.
It's the housing ordinance, it has to be adopted.
Right.
Community workshops.
Yeah.
Where?
They'll probably, we haven't decided where, probably be at Pine Grove or wherever.
So for purposes of today's meeting, and you'll know this is a movement to closure,
But that's kind of what you're thinking.
yeah, but for today, so we wanted to make sure, and I think Layla's been a huge help.
Thank you.
Everybody. So, what the work is coming up, but some of the questions were about behind the scenes. So in order for the group to go forward now, is there anything else anybody needs from Layla? The details will get worked out, they just will. I don't have answers for everything yet, but is there anything else we need to
Well, Rick was talking about Pine Grove Community House membership, and so was I, and maybe some of the rest of you. So how can we coordinate so that if there's actual groups meeting in person, we know who would approach them and take the notes? So that Rick isn't going on Tuesday and I'm going on Thursday.
So we're going to put together a Google Doc that has this list of stakeholders, and we're gonna ask you to sign up.
Okay.
And I would also say that multiple people can go. You don't have a quorum issue like these guys do. It's a quorum right here, but they're not talking policy, so it's cool.
And it's public, so it's.
But, so that's okay. So I think that's how you do it. So we'll use that as a tool, for you to do that. And then you figure out where you can, I wish we had a build thing for you to use. That was easier, but we don't. So, you know,
by next summer though.
by next
Yeah.
summer, we will. But for now, we just kind of have to roll with it. And if you're struggling to find a place, like, the other thing too I wanted to note is we do want to, so the consultant team, think of that, like I have a certain amount of hours. So I would really love it if communication could go through us. So go to Cody, and then he'll figure out, soon enough, he'll be able to answer some of these things, or he'll punt it to me, or we take it up to the consultant team. The other thing we talked about is potentially having a chair and a co-chair of the committee where you all communicate with one person and then that one person communicates with us. Put some thought into that, and at the next meeting, if, you know, maybe send me a message if you all feel comfortable with that. We can appoint somebody to serve in that role. So it's just kind of a main point of contact. They're not gonna be responsible for running the meeting or any of that, but just be a main point of contact.
Actually, Linda Kessner did a lot of that work before. It seems like she should almost be a natural.
Should be really good.
Well, she's not here, so.
Well,
That's
she sort of offered to be the liaison.
She did.
Yeah.
Sort of
Well,
awesome.
I'll put it in my notes.
So can we talk, would it be all right with the group if we talk to her and see if she'd be interested in it?
Yeah, so if that's the case, great, and then you can funnel, it isn't to say I don't wanna talk to any of you, if you guys do need some time, like, let me know, I will make time.
Well, and I was just thinking about the question that Connie mentioned, and that is, if you have a group of people that are at the Pine Grove, you guys can talk about that. It's just that we can't meet as a whole group to talk about
Yeah.
that. So you do your strategy with 3 people and make sure you cover all the bases, and that works.
So does the quorum, how's that
It
work?
doesn't, so these are not even, you guys are an ad hoc committee, so you're not like appointed officials, like you're an official, so you have to like,
Right, but that doesn't mean I can't talk to
Register
these
with
guys, it means I can't talk to the planning commission.
Does it mean that I,
you can talk to John, you're a
Yeah,
We
citizen.
can talk, and I can,
in
in fact, I can talk to.
Only,
this
Yeah.
ad hoc committee?
Yeah, of course. Yes, you can. But like, yes. But John knows he can't go and have a conversation with the quorum of the planning commission about this. These guys know that they can't talk about policy stuff that they're hearing until it's before them in a public meeting, right? So you guys aren't into the same thing. And the reason why the meeting being limited is that you do have a specific role, and we need you to kind of want to channel that energy into that specific role. We'll give you plenty to do. But if you're meeting outside of that as a full group, that undermines the process. Because we don't want, and I know none of you want, there to be any perception that this committee is deciding what's happening. No, your role is to do these specific things that you're being ultimately asked to do by the council, right? Because the council has asked me to implement this thing, I'm leading the project, but I work for this body. The elected officials are ultimately the ones that are kind of directing this work. And so it's super important to the integrity of the process that the meetings are noticed, like it was today, and that we stick to the plan. If we need to have another interim meeting, we can talk about that, but I think after today, we'll probably be in pretty good shape.
You said something about these two can't really be part of the something, I can't remember what you said. It was
Well,
not
I
a
was saying,
comment.
when we get to the policy making part, like, they can't talk about that. They can only talk about it in a public setting.
Okay,
It's the same,
and I
same
have
issues
the,
we
and I have the
have
same
with serial
issues, yeah.
meetings, like Linda can't be like, hey, I think, this policy that the committee is reviewing is, awesome, and I wanna make sure that's in. That she knows that that's off the table, but she can say that in a public meeting, she can say that in a duly noted council meeting when it's before her. So that's what I meant. You guys talk about all this stuff all you want, but,
But all the open meeting rules still apply. I can talk to
We are
Linda, but I
applying them
can't
in
really
good
talk to a
yes.
couple of planning.
They kind of don't,
Yeah.
but we are applying them in good faith. Because
So-
it's the most transparent way of doing this, that your deliberations as the Public Advisory Steering Committee occur in public. Because it's super important to the integrity of the process that everyone who's gonna be involved in this, and may disagree, there will be people who will disagree with what is being put forward, knows that this all happened in a public setting.
So if there's a concern about the process, either coming from one of us or from somebody who speaks to us,
Yeah.
what do we do with a concern about the process? I can't go to Catherine and say, there's a
Share it with
concern
me,
about.
I'm
Share it with
running
you
this
only.
project,
Okay.
so like, love these guys, but like, I'm running,
yeah.
you come to me, because then I filter that, right?
Okay.
And then technically, I'm a subject matter expert here, right?
Yeah.
This is my job, is to run this process.
Okay.
And then they're involved at the stage they need to be. But as soon as they handed it over to me,
Their policy, but your
Their-
process.
I keep them updated on the progress and all of that, and Catherine's involved as the liaison, and Linda's involved as her backup, but like, and then we will update the council as we're going through the process. But I run the project, so if there's project process, any of that stuff related to that, you come through staff.
Yeah, we need you to
That's
Cody first.
Yeah, well, he'll filter it, just because I've got a couple of things going on right now.
Yeah.
This is super important.
Two quick things to help honor your point about let's close things up.
Yeah, stakeholder list, do you have any more?
Number
Yes, actually, I
Okay.
just put my laptop away, but Linda has added, we have a Google Drive,
Okay,
and there's a spreadsheet where we have added additional groups noted as to add.
okay, can you send that to Cody?
Yes.
Okay.
I just went on the Google thing and added them on the spreadsheet.
That sounds like
She allowed
something
us to
there,
allow us
Yeah,
to
that
do
is, we'll forward that.
Yeah.
Cody's email is on the website, it's everywhere.
It's something I'm going to ask.
c.cohen@ci.mansfield.org.
Yes.
Does Cody have access to the Google Drive?
Give me a
No,
second.
we don't have it. It's
We're gonna
on the
forward it to him, right?
Let me,
Not currently.
this one.
And we need
Would it not
to,
make sense just to give him access so we don't have to be passing version control around?
well, we'll create one that's a project one that includes everything. And then I think that's the other thing is we need to manage the documents.
Yes,
Right.
So share your stuff with us, but we'll translate that into our own thing, and then what you're signing up for should be through the project.
what is your email address?
Here,
See,
it's at the bottom.
Thank you.
yeah.
Does that make sense? I'm not a control freak, I'd rather delegate this to somebody else, which is why Cody will mention.
Yeah.
And then sign up and get to work.
Yeah.
Does anybody have a calendar of like all the groups that we meet? If we don't, this is for future. It'd be really cool to have an idea.
Rick kind of has an idea of that, right, Rick? The community calendar?
We can talk about that later.
That's not about a calendar of meeting though, for these meetings. That's something separate.
Okay, we'll figure that out.
Cool.
I have, so I realize we got 4 minutes left, but just, I have a couple concerns. So for me, us doing this in a coordinated fashion is important. So this has been a very productive meeting. Layla, thank you for taking the time. I still feel there needs to be a step where we're agreeing these are the prioritized interest groups that we'll focus on. If we all sign up on Google Doc, I would suggest it's fine to double up. Then we just need to resolve those conflicts. Is that a one-person job? One of us takes it, or we share that. That just feels like there's a level of coordination. We just go hit the streets. I'm afraid we're going to do that in an overlapping, uncoordinated way if we just go right now.
Well, so I'm thinking that this Google Doc will help you do that. And I think what I'd like to see in there, what I suggested to the consultant, and I'd be not willing, I would appreciate any feedback you have, Rick, is what's your goal date to talk to those people?
Yeah.
So if you kind of sign up like Rick wants to go talk to this,
Yes.
I'm going to talk date or range, like expected engagement time, then Connie can be like, I want to come to that, I'll join you. Or she'll know that time is already passed and you want to put in there completed, notes sent or something. So we'll
Totally agree.
Our working document, and then if you have comments on how that can be more useful to you, maybe the document you send over will be illuminating for us to pull from. We can make those adjustments to that. And it will actually be an open document. So if you want to make some changes to it to help with that organization, because you guys as a team may have a different approach than what we suggest, but I think as a minimum, you would sign up when you anticipate doing that, whether it's completed and then whether your notes are submitted would be the 4 categories that immediately come to my mind. But I would welcome you to make any of those changes. And I expect to have that in the next day or so, but we want your final list. I mean, again, you can add stuff to it. We're not gonna hit everybody. We'll hit the folks that we can. And then we may be ending up doing additional follow-up.
So when do you want the final list of the?
I would love it as soon as possible. So like today would be great. But again, if you think of something in the next week, I don't want you to feel like you can't add that.
Okay.
But this will at least I can give it to Violet and she can populate that worksheet, and then it's kind of on you to maintain it and we'll just keep our eye on it. But then you'll send us your information, and then when we get kind of critical mass of that, we'll say, hey, we got 10 reports this week. Wouldn't that be great? Here's what we got from folks, and we'll just sort of send that out to you guys to look at your leisure and if you want to.
Sounds good. So any other kind of last minute questions? Layla, this was really helpful. I think it helped focus us and get a really good idea of where we were going.
I'm
So thank you.
excited.
Yeah, it's a great project, and it's overwhelming in a way, and in a way it's really exciting. So it's kind of, yeah, right, gotta remember that.
Zoom out.
So assuming that Linda Kestner agrees to this,
Yeah.
then this group would go through Linda to ask you, or,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And if you want to meet with me just separately, like, I can do that. My schedule's, but this is important, so.
And if I can give a little plug for Linda Kestner, I worked with her on many projects. You are being more.
really good. Yeah.
She is excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys for coming.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Hi, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you guys, nice to see you,
Brad,
Cody.
thanks for the tech.
Bye.
Or has been.
That's it, okay?